Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello. I'm joining because there are a couple of mail requests that I'm involved, and I'd like to know a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Welcome. Let's wait a few minutes until others might join, and then we can just start it.
Cool.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, all right, let's start. So Andreas cannot join this time, so he gave me the rights to start the meeting. And our first point on the agenda is from Steve. Steve, can you verbalize it?
Yeah, so I was recently reviewing an MR where there was a concern about the add column with default helper, and it was on a table that had previously had an incident dealing with rename column concurrently. And so the question that I ended up really considering was we were dealing with an add column with default on a Boolean column. And so the original way that the MR was structured was we weren't going to be adding a default to the Boolean column, and all of the existing records were going to just remain null. So my question was, what's everyone's thoughts on sort of allowing allowing existing records to have null in a Boolean column, which would generally equate to false, but it does create that sort of triple value column.
Yeah, so it really depends on the table itself. I know for sure that on the CI related tables, like CI builds, CI pipelines, we add columns and we don't provide a default value simply because even using add column with default would definitely cause some stability issues. The helper method is basically rewriting the whole table because it batch updates the records and then adds a not null constraint at the end, which is which can be quite how to say, can block the other application code from inserting or updating records in the table. At the other hand, I've seen examples, and I also had one before regarding to larger tables. For example, the user tables, we had a case where we had to batch update one of the field to eliminate the null values and then add a not null constraint, and it was totally fine. I would say in this case, this should be fine using add column with default. The largest example I've seen was about 6 million records we updated within one migration. And which one is the table? I forgot it. It is the service.
Services, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how often that table is updated or used. If it's a vital part of the CI infrastructure, CI pipelines infrastructure, I might think that this could lead to issues, but I'm not quite familiar with the feature.
Okay, that makes sense.
So one thing we can always do to, like updating 3 million records during this deployment, because the migration runs when we deploy the new code to Canary, we could maybe prepare a background migration that pre-fills the existing items, to eliminate the nulls. And then the migration where we disable the null and set the default value has to update just a small amount of records. That would be a bit safer approach. At least the deployment would be reliably faster. But I wouldn't say that this is like a requirement. So I think I'm fine with that column with default.
Cool. And then I have the second question as well, which it was just a curiosity. As I was reading through an issue, I wasn't sure what the 10K environment was referring to, but and it looks like my question has been answered. Thanks, Tune. And just for people watching, I guess it's the 10,000 user configuration environment.
By the way, if you, on your local GDK, if you want to have 1 million users, you can set the shell variable mass insert true. So that's another way to, or there are some documentation to generate millions of records for any table with bulk insert in the examples there. So mass insert equals 1 or something.
It might take a while to get that amount of records, but yeah, that's a good tip. So the next one is mine, the third one. So recently I got a merge request where somebody wanted to add an additional column to the users table, and it was about some markdown field. So your bio, you currently have a bio field on the user table where you can fill in some of your details, and they wanted to make it like a markdown friendly, and this means we need to add another column where we store the HTML representation of basically the bio field. And this, I started like, it sounded to me like it's probably not the best place to put this column. And I also noticed that we have some fields that are absolutely not used in the core feature set of the application. You can see it on the user's profile page. You can see it via the API. You can see it when you hover on the user's name on the UI, which makes an additional HTTP request. And my idea was to take these, I would say, large columns out of the users table and move it to somewhere else. Simply, these are large string fields, and there is no limit on the columns. So if you have database access, you can easily find a doctor in Texas, because there are a few spammers who are trying to fill up these large columns with crappy data. And I also found a record where the organization was like 200 kilobytes long, which, if this goes out of hand, can significantly affect the performance, because loading one user, you might need to load like 200-300 kilobytes from the disk. So I started working on MR. That's basically a background migration where we slowly try to take out these data from the users table and put it into user details table. And yeah, it's still a work in progress, and I'm planning to use a trigger for that. So a background migration that does most of the work, and a trigger that ensures that the two tables are synced. So the first deployment, we don't have to touch the application code because everything works as today. But additionally, we will save the data in an extra table. And later on, when things looking good, we can eliminate the columns from the users table. And of course, if this is working out, I've already seen in the schema that we put a tons of configuration specific fields to projects, groups, namespaces, CI related tables. And we could maybe make a practice out of this, that, hey, the core domain object should like stay kind of clean, just the important stuff, and any additional like configuration or small details could go to a details table or a preference table. And yeah, any comment on that?
Does this require the use of structure.sql instead of schema.rb because of the trigger?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have a helper method for the migration called rename column concurrently, I think. That one also using a trigger to first create the new column and then sync the data. But the whole thing is basically done within one migration. So the trigger is a short-lived trigger. So we clean up within the same deployment cycle. In this case, the trigger would be there for at least 1 or 2 releases. So yeah, it would be probably better to say, hey, let's wait for structure.sql to make sure the trigger is persisted. Because if we have an installation, let's say somebody, a self-hosted customer installs it, and I think by default, the schema is being loaded when they set up the application, and of course, they won't have the trigger. So I would say let's wait for the structure SQL before moving this forward. And of course, we will need proper performance test for this. I try to specify the trigger to not to activate itself when basically the relevant fields are not changed. So we only react and sync data when the actual field that we are syncing has changed. So there is an option for the trigger specification, but still it would be nice to see the performance impact. And I think we can easily measure this. Not super easily, but it's possible via database lab, because you can just give a bunch of SQL commands and measure. It gives us the execution times.
I had a comment. I think this is a great idea. The only thing that I'm a little unsure about is like a name user details. I'm not really sure what details is. And I feel like that's sort of like a little bit, maybe have like a grab bag name. And if it contains profile information, maybe it should just be called like user profile or something, or user profiles. If that's the intent, I think it's just maybe a little more clear. It's just so it doesn't become sort of a catch-all table that just holds sort of whatever information we don't want to put on the main user record. It's just a thought.
But
Yeah,
I
that's-
think, Patrick, I think we need a catch-all table for anything we don't want to put on users, because users is kind of something we want to keep safe, maybe. Just
We already have a table called user preferences, and that's like your what kind of color scheme you are using and things like that. Originally, I wanted to put it there, but Alper pointed out that it's probably not the best place because it's not like a preference. It's more like a detail for the user. It's like the bio, the Twitter URL, the LinkedIn URL, and location. So to me, details looks okay, but yeah, we can think about another one, other name, maybe user profile. Could also work.
actually, in the discussion, I think there are some other non-profile things which are in users table, which are not used a lot. And that was, I think, your original intention to move infrequently used columns to, user details or profiles. So if you make it profiles now, like what Patrick said, we really need a place to put, a lot of user stuff. Like, let me give you an example. I have put recently a column in the user preferences table. Maybe I just behaved as if it's a preferences by naming it like a preference. However, if I had user details, I would put it there. And why do I want to avoid users? It's because one of the larger tables, column size is increasing, and I want to avoid it, and yeah. Also, in the future, the growth team, we plan to put some other stuff to, per user, and I don't want to put it in the users table. And if it's user profiles, then it will be too little. So I will not be able to put anywhere. That means I will need to create a third table. So we might, or fourth table, like users, user profiles, user preferences, and then I will create maybe users experiment details or something like that. Anyway, that's just an idea.
No, that makes sense. I just from looking at the thing, I just saw it looked like mostly profile information. But if there's intent to store other data there too, then that that doesn't really make sense to name it profiles.
The users itself becomes a catch-all place. That's the risk, I think.
Yeah, right.
Is there a downside to having many secondary tables? So if we just continue to make additional user something tables based on trying to group things together that are used together, is there a downside if we end up with 10 different tables?
Yeah, I would say we have to be careful. You want to move things out from the users table that are not used frequently. So, for example, the username that's basically used everywhere in the application. Moving that to another table would have a significant performance penalty. But let's say the bio field is used at exactly 3 places. There is not much risk that this is going to cause an issue because we just have to preload an additional relation, so an additional query needs to be executed. But yeah, that's a good point. We have to be very careful what we separate from the users. And well, I mean, we don't have a crystal ball, right? To tell the future that, hey, in the future we might need to sort by the bio field. Sounds stupid, but this is just an example. And then we would be pretty much, yeah, it wouldn't work really well because then you have to join an additional relation, and then sorting could be an issue. Anything else?
All right, I think I have
If
the
not,
next.
then yeah,
point.
that's Steve.
And so another review that I was working on this week mentions adding how adding an index in specific cases might not be valid for self-managed instances. And I found that a little odd and surprising, and wasn't really sure how to address that. And so I was mostly curious if this is something that ever comes up commonly, and if there's any concerns about it.
So I looked at it a bit, and I seen Sean's comment about the data, and then Arturo had a reply on it. So it seems that in this specific case, we might have duplicated records in the database. So we might not be able to create the unique index, but on the application level, it looks like we always return the first service template. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Yeah. So Sean's comments are addressing two things. One is adding a new validation with maybe invalid records in the database. So we need to resolve that. But the other point is adding an index that maybe is only relevant for GitLab.com, but maybe it's not relevant, that index, for self-host installations, because maybe they are using the data in a different way. So I was surprised also for that concern. So I'm not sure exactly what is the approach here, or the right approach. Like assuming like if we have a problem, we need to fix that, even penalizing maybe in some way adding an index for self-host installations, or we can evaluate case by case.
So the question is that so ideally we have one schema for the whole GitLab, so we don't have like a customer specific schema. So if we want to ensure uniqueness, we have to ensure uniqueness even on the self-hosted instances. And if we can clean the potential applications up without basically breaking anything, and I think that's what we should do before adding the index. And from this comment, I can kind of see that this is just a deduplication migration, what we have to do. So eliminate the duplicated records and then apply the index. But again, I'm not quite familiar with the services table. So yeah, we might need to reach out to someone who has some historical context about the whys and make a decision.
Yeah, as growth team, the fulfillment team, we work a lot with customers' application, which is particular, which has particular functionality for GitLab.com. Even in that case, like we have GitLab, we have Enterprise Edition, and then the subset, which is GitLab.com. Even in that scenario, we try to have the schema available for Community Edition, Enterprise Edition, and GitLab.com, and we have one schema. Like we have a lot of tables which make no sense at all in Enterprise Edition or in self-hosted, and we still stick to one schema and multiple code branches. So I think based on that, we should have one schema. If we have 2 or 3 of this thing, we'll face in the future other, branching and conditional behavior, which may make things worse later.
Yes, so I'm not sure in this case it makes sense to create I'm not sure this is a new feature that we are building now or building on an existing one, but it sometimes makes sense to create a new table rather than putting everything in the current table. We often make the mistake to make these polymorphic associations and put everything into one database table and later on realize that, hey, this on the short term saves us time because less work needs to be done, but on the longer term, ensuring consistency, it will bite back. So I'm not sure at the current use case, but I see two options here: find a way to clean up the table and make the unique index, or a new table for the new feature. But yeah, that's what I can see now.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose we'll do a little more research and see if we can find some more information as to whether or not this would have an effect on self-managed, and then make a decision from there.
Yeah, I would opt for the first solution, like try to deduct it, because that seems we already have experience with it. We did it a few times, and the table is not that big, so it could work, I guess.
So for me, the part that is surprising is I added a uniqueness validation, and Steve say, hey, we have to add a unique index here for the two columns, which makes sense. And then some say, hey, maybe we have to be more careful, like adding indexes. And that part is the part that is surprising to me, like if we have a uniqueness relation, make a lot of sense to add the index in any case, I guess, right?
Yeah, so if you have a uniqueness validation on the model, you want to basically ensure the consistency on the database level. Simply the application level check is not enough because we have multiple instances running, so there is a concurrency issue, like a race condition. And also performance. So if you have a large table, find what the race validation does on the active record side is check, hey, do I have this record in the database? Yes, no. And based on that, you get the validation message. And on a large table without an index, looking this up could significantly increase the application response time.
Cool. Thank you very much.
No, thanks.
Is there anything else we should discuss? If not, then everybody have a nice day.
I just noticed Alper's comment from from the previous question was not handled, I think, about using triggers or storage procedures instead of active record callbacks. Like I've been in the discussion also, like using callbacks instead, or it was more not using callbacks, but was using services. So I'm not sure if do we have opinions on using callbacks or not, or is it more a backend thing that we should discuss somewhere else?
So I think about callbacks, it really depends. If your callback needs to talk to other tables or maybe an external service, then it's probably better to use a service object and avoiding active record callbacks completely. And I think in this particular example, Alper is referring to ensure data consistency in callbacks or triggers. So I think this one was to to basically sync two database fields in two different tables. Am I right, Alper?
Yeah, totally. But you mentioned it's going to be short-lived, right? The trigger.
Yeah, yeah. And
so basically, we are the database team, and triggers kind of falls in our realm. So we want to use it. If it was the backend team, then they would come up with a migration and callback-based solution. I think if the approach to populate user details makes sense, the way you do the trigger, we should make it a database library at some point to empower other backend engineers to do it the same way. Like your idea in the future for project, namespace, and other tables. And we should avoid having other backend engineers writing triggers, maybe.
One thing about the callback. So ideally, let's say when I save something via Active Record and I want to update another relation, that normally happens in the same transaction, right? So that's, I would say, almost as safe as using a trigger, but we have to also think about our deployment procedures. So when we deploy the new application code, some servers still running the old code, some servers are running the new code, and you might not get some columns in sync when you are not that lucky that your request is not going to the new server. I can think of a few cases where this could be a problem, and trigger is like on the global level because it's enforced on the database level. So I would say it's much safer. I was originally thinking to do this migration without triggers, but after thinking about it, if we have to roll back and during deployment, there could be a few cases where we simply miss syncing some fields because the request goes to the old server.
I mean, my discussion on trigger versus callbacks is like a general, let's say, architecture discussion, not particular to here. Like in the future, people will see Adam's MR here. They will try to, do things in triggers, which will bring us to a new era, like where people are writing now, which is maybe fine. It's just, or we may choose to make them as usual database libraries, like put it under library or stuff like. I mean, I'm not particularly against this one. I'm just.
Yeah, this structured SQL opens Pandora's box, right? We have access to so many new features, and I think the best thing we can do is lead the way, start using slowly things within the database team, so we know what's happening, and clearly communicate and document our approach. There is another one going on about making the not null checks like more efficient using check constraints. That's something we are kind of looking at to make it available as soon as we have the structure SQL in place. But yeah, we have to just be clear and clearly communicate. Maybe with structure SQL, we have to list that, hey, we have this feature now. We can safely use these constructs from Postgres, but we are not there yet. So if there is nothing left, then anybody else? Questions? Remarks? Okay, then. And have a nice day, everyone.
Thanks,
and
everyone. Bye.
See you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thanks, Adam. Bye-bye.